Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Creepy Fox Scary Stories podcast. Today, we'll take a listen to some of the creepy things that have happened to my subscribers at libraries. Now, just to preface, this is another one of my filler Scary Stories episodes, as I'm once again awaiting more subscribers to send in their stories. So make sure to use the timestamps to help you get through the episode. Who knows, there might be a couple of stories in here that you haven't heard yet. But yes, just a reminder once again that if you do have a scary story to share, do make sure to share it so we aren't doing too many of these filler episodes, as I have to put something out, otherwise the YouTube algorithm will punish my channel and you won't see my videos. But yes, with that said, make sure to sit back, relax, and enjoy these scary library stories. This strange and bizarre incident happened when I'd picked up a job working for a local library. This puts us at roughly 7 years ago. I was 19 years old. I'm female, by the way. Now, that library in specific always stood out to me ever since I first took a field trip there in elementary school. I fell in love with the bronze statues of dinosaurs, which were shining under the warm, hot summer, and I thought to myself, I would like to work here someday. That brings us to 2013. Anyway, the library was 2 stories, where the first story was where all the aisles of books were located, and the second story featured a computer lab for the community to use. The first story required the patrons to keep noise to a bare minimum, while the computer lab featured a more laid-back and casual attitude. We would often get teenagers who would go to the second story to work on their homework, which was preferred since we all know how rowdy teenagers can become. The first story featured more of the older crowd, retired folks, and people as young as mid-50s. Unfortunately, this meant I was wide open to some, let's just say, interesting interactions. This is the story of such interaction. I had been working during the weekday, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, which saw a huge increase in the elderly folks. I was sitting at the front desk working on a spreadsheet when, at the corner of my eye, I saw a bright flash. I didn't think about it until I returned to typing. However, moments later, I see the flash again, and now I hear someone curse under their breath. This time I look up from the boring old computer monitor, and I focus my stare at a table. Sitting there is a man who I'd say was in his early 50s, holding up a smartphone. He had pepperish gray short hair, a light stubble, glasses, and was wearing a Lakers sweatshirt with some blue jeans. Immediately, he drops his phone to the table and picks up the newspaper. I assumed he must have been reading that. This was the point I had a suspicion that he might have been taking photos of me, or even worse, video. Perhaps that was the reasoning to his sudden startled reaction. I didn't want to come to conclusions, however, so I get back to work. However, this time I had a plan. In order to ensure I wasn't being paranoid, I would very sneakily look up every couple of minutes to see what the man was doing. On the second try, I catch him pointing his phone directly at me. He then does that little pinch you do with your fingers toward the smartphone screen in order to zoom in. I can now see he's got a pretty creepy smile on his face. That was enough for me to get up and walk over to him. He puts his phone in his pocket and tries to get up to leave, but I ended up stopping him. "Excuse me, sir, but could you maybe not take pictures of the librarians?" I say in a half-angry, half-sarcastic tone. "I wasn't taking photos of you. I was just testing this new camera out. You just so happened to be in the way." He said something along those lines. I pretty much told him to knock it off, and he ends up leaving. However, that's not the end of my story. It's only going to get that much worse. Fast forward about a week later, and I'm on the closing team with my fellow librarian, Josh. He's an older man in his early 40s who served with the United States Marines. Really, he looked like a tough guy on the outside. But when you got to know him, he was like a teddy bear that you'd want to hug. I sort of considered him like an uncle. So it's roughly 8:55 p.m. and I'm doing the rounds of the first story. Josh was on floor number 2 locking up the computer lab. Out of nowhere, I hear footsteps behind me from one of the aisles. "Josh, is that you? Did you already finish?" Instead, it was that creepy man from a week ago, and he's got the biggest, creepiest grin across his face. However, that was the least of my concerns. I could now see he's grasping onto a small pocket knife, and before I could get a single word out, he started to make his way toward me, ever so maniacally. I booked it to the second story, throwing chairs and books behind me, trying to put as much distance as I could between myself and this creep. When I reached the staircase, I was just hoping I wouldn't trip. Funny enough, when I look down the stairs, I see the man stumble for a brief second. This was enough for me to make my way toward Josh. Josh, there's a man with a knife. Josh's reaction was one of disbelief. Not that I could really blame him. The library is meant to be a place of relaxation and peace, not a location to run away from a bad guy with a knife. Thankfully, Josh changed his mindset once he sees the man peeking around the corner. Josh could have just let the man go, but in his what I'm assuming was his training taking over, he books it over to the creep. Now Josh is easily 6'4", 250 pounds of pure muscle. Meanwhile, the other man was about 5'11", 170 pounds. Anyway, Josh is able to disarm the knife-wielding creep while I call the police, who just so happen to be a block away from us. The man is questioned and soon put into handcuffs. I ended up filing a restraining order and he was required to stay away for a certain distance. I think Josh might have scared him straight, however, because I never did see him again after that night. By the way, Josh and I are still friends today, and I actually just went to his son's birthday party just last week. This happened in a span of a few minutes and still freaks me out to this very day. This was in the early 2000s when I was a sophomore in high school. I recall this being a transition period between writing essays on paper and writing essays on the computer. Almost all my teachers required submission of their papers by hand. But don't get me started on my history teacher. He was this technology buff, and he was really excited to have the class type out their work on a computer. This would have been a fine thing if I had a computer at home, but alas, my family just couldn't afford one. Now, we could have rented laptops that we could take home from the high school, but those were usually gone within minutes. This meant my only other option was the computer lab, except those computers were always busy too. Now, seeing as I was always hanging out with my girlfriend at the time, I usually procrastinated on my homework. This case was no different. Thus, I ended up going to the library, which just so happened to be across the street from the school. I walk in, and I was greeted by the friendly librarian as I give her an annoyed smirk. I couldn't believe I was going to spend my entire afternoon, and presumably evening, typing away in front of a computer screen. Thankfully, this was a time before social media was really a thing, and smartphones were just a part of the imagination. Just imagine, I would have never gotten my work done with all that distraction. Anyway, I park my butt at one of the computers and I soon get to work. About an hour into the typing, I realized I needed to at least include 2 credible sources. You see, we weren't allowed to use anything from the internet, which is why I get the bright idea of going to the 3rd story, where all the history books are located. This library was 4 stories, by the way. So I save my draft and tell the man next to where I sat if he could save my spot. Then, when I reach the 3rd floor, via staircase, it's absolutely silent there. Quite a difference from the basement, where the computer lab was. I could hear the buzz of the lights flickering on and off and hear the ambience of the air conditioning unit as it blasted an icy and chilly breeze, like it was straight out of the Antarctic. My footsteps resonated with each step, echoing against the cold and silent hallway floor as I walked to the very back corner. This was where I found the books I was looking for. Now, within a minute, I've got what I've came for, and I begin to make my way to the elevator. I wasn't really looking to use the stairs again since they were a pain. Now, before I could turn the corner, someone does the task for me. Standing down the hallway was a man who was holding a brown paper bag with what appears to be like a bottle inside. It was the kind of bag your mom would use to pack your lunch in. Anyway, this man was tall, easily over 6 foot. It must have been between 200 and 230 pounds. He wore a black t-shirt with some small holes toward the top, and he had some oversized baggy jeans with black and white sneakers. He was bald. He sported a goatee and had tattoos on both his arms, sort of like sleeves. I now got a whiff of alcohol and I thought to myself, this guy is most likely intoxicated. Well, all I had to do was get past him and I could continue along with my research. However, I would tell one of the librarians that there was some man on the third story who appeared to have been drinking. So I now start to approach him so I can pass him, but then he suddenly takes a hold of my arm. "Hey there, want to have a drink with me?" he says with the smell of alcohol becoming stronger. "No thanks, I've got a paper to work on. Have a nice day." I was expecting this was the point he would let go of me and he would just go about his day, but he doesn't. He's still got a tight grasp on my arm. He now begins to ask me once again, but this time with a more angrier tone. I tell him I need to leave, and now he finally lets go. I'm pretty much doing all I could not to punch this guy because he easily had the advantage. Anyway, I'm now approaching the elevator thinking, whatever, this guy had clearly lost his mind. But then I hear his footsteps coming closer to me. The man starts cursing at me and calling me all these names, saying that he was going to kill me. I'm all about freaking out at this point as the elevator doors open and I hop in. I remember smashing that close button, which I swear never even works. The man is inching his way closer and closer to me, and I realize it's too late for me to run to the staircase because he would have easily have caught me. Just as I think he's going to make it in, the doors finally close, and I hear him banging on the wall, still cursing at me. I now fell to the ground and actually shed a tear. Here I was, this small 5'8", 150-pound dude on the baseball team who wasn't afraid of anything, actually shaking. Normally, I would have fought him, but I'm so glad I didn't, as I would learn something very scary. Anyway, I still wasn't out of this situation just yet. I needed to reach the front lobby and tell the security guard what was happening. They ended up calling the police department and everyone in the library was asked to leave. Some were asked to remain locked in rooms until the situation was under control. When all was said and done, the man turned out to be a local drunk who apparently wasn't having any of what people were telling him to do. Worst off, they found a knife on him. Just thinking about that is so scary. I mean, I could have possibly gotten stabbed had I fought him. Either way, I ended up getting an extension for the assignment, and I wrote the paper at a friend's house instead. At the time this occurred, I didn't realize just how scary and serious of a situation this truly was. The story itself isn't too long, but it's enough that I think it'll bring you some chills nonetheless. This occurred in the late 90s when I used to work as a janitor for a library. It had been another day as usual. I clocked in, I chit-chatted with the librarians, the guests, and I mainly hung out in the back room, listening to the radio and munching on some donuts. Really fun and easy job, if you could handle cleaning the restrooms, that is. Those restrooms were an entire horror story in themselves, if you know what I mean. Anyway, I don't want to get too distracted here. I was at the front of the library mopping the wooden floor panels, when all of a sudden I could hear loud police sirens. We do have a hospital just a few blocks from us, which was why I first thought that it might have been the paramedics. But then I was made aware of the helicopter, followed by another, and then another. Unless there was some movie being filmed that I wasn't told about, hearing all this activity was very unexpected. Well, going back to the mopping has me interrupted by the sound of car tires screeching. I turn around and I look through the large front glass window, where I was joined by some of the other library patrons. We are able to see two men with face masks as they're running out of a dark SUV, each holding large duffel bags. Suddenly, everyone in the library scrambled for cover while I stood there sort of in shock. This next part is both chilling but hilarious at the same time. Almost like I was in the middle of an episode of a cartoon, one of the individuals slips and falls on the wet ground I just mopped. The duffel bag falls and a pistol comes flying out of it, which is followed by an audible gasp from the guests in the library. I'm not even joking. Within seconds, there are about 10 police officers running into the library with their own guns at the ready. At that point, I've gone and kicked the pistol far away from this man's reach. The police are now able to handcuff him, but his accomplice did end up running out the back door. Thankfully, the police also managed to catch up to him. Only the man who tripped was armed with a pistol, meanwhile the other had a knife. As it turned out, they had just robbed a bank 30 minutes prior to this, and they led the police on quite a wild chase, which just so happened to have stopped at our library. It's scary to think that those men were actually armed, and had I not mopped the floor that afternoon, what would have happened? Not sure, but it's nice to know that things turned out okay. This happened a few years ago. For some context, I'm a librarian working in a small library in the Pacific Northwest. I mainly work in the evenings, but sometimes I get called to work during the daytime. Now, I'm not really a big fan of those morning shifts since I'm actually a night owl. So wouldn't you know it, one of my coworkers called out with no one else available, so the task was put on me. So here I was on one of my grumpy days, where I ended up having to deal with something pretty bizarre. But hey, that's part of working. You always got to expect the unexpected. It was bright and early at 5 a.m. as I'm suddenly awoken out of my dream by the annoying sound of my alarm clock, which I always tell myself I need to change it, but I'm too lazy to do so. Anyway, I go ahead and get changed and decided I would go to the donut shop to get some donuts for myself and the librarians. It was a nice gesture since just a few days prior, some co-workers had bought me a cake for my birthday. I ordered a dozen glazed donuts and then I arrived to the library 10 minutes later, but the sun still hadn't peeked out of the horizon and the parking lot was illuminated only by the cheap street lights that had been here since the early 2000s. As I approach the back of the library to let myself in, I'm spooked by the sound of footsteps. I take a look and see a homeless-looking man who asks me if I had any sort of change on me. I had none, but I thought it would be a good gesture if I offered him a donut. However, I don't think he cared for that, because he started to ramble about the most random things. Something about how he was the chosen one and how he was going to save everyone because bad things were apparently coming. But what was even worse was that he was holding a whiskey bottle. The thing was nearly empty, and judging by his speech pattern, plus the things he said, he had already most likely drank the whole thing. The next few moments happened within seconds. As I turned to walk away from him and let myself in, I hear the sound of glass breaking. I turn around and can see the bottle was smashed, and now the sharp end was being pointed at me. The man tells me he wants to come in so he could, in his words, show me the way. But I'm in that door quicker than you could say apple pie. I then hear him kicking and demanding I let him into the library, or he was going to break in if it was the last thing that he did. I was already on the line with the police and told them that if he didn't leave, he was going to be in a whole world of trouble. I don't think he cared because while I'm talking to the operator, he's trying to open the front door, even though it was clearly locked. Well, he sure wasn't lying when he said he was going to do anything to get in. The dude seriously throws his full body against the door, and I could see him through the door's little window. I will say, those were some pretty steady doors because I was shocked that they didn't break down. Anyway, all jokes aside, I'm relaying all this information in shock. I eventually lose sight of him and police got there within 10 minutes. The operator told me that police were actually outside, but to remain locked in place until it was safe to do so. About 2 minutes later, the operator tells me that it's okay to step out. I notice they had the guy in handcuffs and he's sitting on the curbside while police officers are just talking to him. Eventually, they take him away and I gave the police my statement, including what led up to the current circumstances. I later found out that the man was connected with some car break-ins. Pretty crazy, right? I know this isn't the scariest story in the world, but just imagine being outside in the dark and having some dude come at you with a sharp bottle. It's going to catch you off guard, that's for sure. For clarification, this is from the perspective of a 24-year-old female. At least twice a week, I used to volunteer at a library where I read to elementary students. This was in part with my teaching credentials program, which saw me working with younger kids. How I can't go without saying it's one of the greatest privileges in the world. There's just something about seeing these group of kids sit around you and be so engaged with your storytelling that it really brings you a smile. Some kids even brought me chocolate, but perhaps what I loved the most were the comments from their parents about how I changed that kid's life. Really, it's moments such as those ones that are forever engraved in my heart. But as much as I'd like to sit here and talk to you all about the nice things, there are some not so nice things, creepy things in fact, that really show you just how crazy some people can be, and that's me putting it lightly. So there had been a few times I went to the library to read to students where I noticed this man was watching me. I thought he was the father of one of the kids, which is why I didn't really think of him too much. I did find his 100-mile stare a bit weird, which made some of my readings a bit rushed. One day when I had wrapped up, he ended up approaching me and asked if I wanted to go get some drinks with him at the bar. I told him I don't drink alcohol, to which he then asked if he could get my phone number so that he could call me sometime. I tell him I didn't give out that personal information, and I can see him grow visibly upset. For the next couple of weeks, he would show up to my readings, and every time he would flirt and try to get me to go on dates with him. By the way, we're talking about a man in his 50s. Eventually, I started to have enough, and I stopped volunteering at that library for a short time. I should have told someone what was happening, and I really regret not speaking up. But what can I do? I can't go back in time. About a month passes, and I make my return. Kids asked me where I was, and I made something up telling them I went on vacation. For the next 2 weeks, there are no signs of that man from before, and I'm starting to think he's finally moved on, or even better, realized that what he was doing was a mistake. One evening, I had stayed a little bit later at the library to do some research, and as I sat at a table focusing on my studies, guess who shows up? Mr. Stalker Creep. Where have you been? I haven't seen you as of late. Have you changed your mind and decided to accept my offer? I finally was at a breaking point. I didn't care if the librarians got angry with me, so I take a deep breath, and then at the top of my lungs I say, I don't even know who you are. Stop talking to me. I'm not interested in you. The man is suddenly getting nervous as he starts to walk away. One of the patrons asked if something was wrong, and I told him the guy was bothering me. He responds by saying he would be more than happy to teach the guy a lesson, but I reassured him I wasn't looking for anyone to get hurt. Anyway, I wanted to get home as I was frustrated, so I pack up my things and start to make my way to the parking lot. Hey, wait up. Come back, I just want to talk to you. I hear the creep say at a distance. I didn't even bother paying attention to him. I jump into my car and start to exit the parking lot, but I notice I'm being followed by my stalker. Therefore, I come up with an idea. Let's drive to the police station. Well, dude had no clue where I was leading him to as he inched his way closer and closer to my back bumper. Eventually, it seems he's caught on to my little trick. So I ended up passing a yellow light and driving into the police station's parking area. There were a couple of officers standing next to their vehicle, talking and drinking some cups of coffee. Mr. Stalker was now stuck at the red light across the street as he watched the whole thing unfold. I told the police officers what was happening and that I was being followed, and they soon get into their police cruiser. All of a sudden, I see my stalker do a quick turnaround and drive out of there faster than a cheetah runs after its prey. I'm not sure if they caught him or not. I should have stayed around, but I was so tired and fed up, I just wanted to go back home. I stopped volunteering at that library, and I ended up moving back in with my parents a few cities over just a month later. As an update, I saw a vehicle similar to the one the man drove the other day when I was picking up some fast food, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't his. Still, however, it gave me a mini panic attack. So it was a Friday night at the library, and I was working on a paper for my English class. There are a couple of students here and there, and some adults that were reading at some of the tables. At one point, I needed to get up to pick out a book that was on the second floor. So I get up and head up there and began looking for my book. As I started to make my way down a poorly lit aisle of books, a man turns the corner up in front of me. He looked to be in his early 30s with dirty brown long hair and a ripped up t-shirt and loose jeans. Now, I wouldn't have minded him too much if it wasn't for what was about to happen next. "Hello there. Do you need some help finding a book?" "No, I already know where it is. Thanks anyway." "No, please, come closer. I'll help you." Mind you, I'd never seen this person before, and he surely didn't look like any sort of librarian. He kept on going about how this was his first day as a librarian. I passed by him nonetheless, but now he begins to follow me. "By the way, my name is Donnie. What's yours?" I tried not to be rude, so I just gave him a random name. "Oh, my name is Bree. It's nice to meet you." "That's a nice name. By the way, how old are you?" "I'm 18. Why does it matter?" I'm starting to feel a bit awkward as the creepy face he suddenly had on his face showed me that he was after more than just helping me. "Really? You look like you could be 24. Are you sure you aren't messing around with me?" I ignore him, grab my book, and I begin walking back the way I came from. However, before I could get too far, he grabs my arm and pulls me closer. "Wait, let me give you my number. Call me sometime, will you? If you need any help studying, I'll be your man." The dude has a tight grasp and he isn't letting go. Bear in mind, I'm pretty much yelling at this point, but it seemed the second story was completely empty. After about 10 seconds, he had the decency to let me go, and I take off running. Once I'm downstairs, I head to the front desk and tell them about the creep I encountered. The librarian and a teacher head up there, only to find the place was empty. From the looks of it, he had taken the second story exit and was the reason as to why he wasn't found. In the end, I ripped up the note he gave me with his number on it, and I myself would never see or hear from him ever again. I will start my submission by stating I've been wanting to send this to the Creepy Fox for quite some time. I know a lot of people are going to think that this is bogus, but I do have fellow students, library staff, and friends that are willing to back me up. I'll even include evidence if needed and the school involved, but I do want to keep things private. So I'll have the Creepy Fox include my email in the description or something so I can tell you more about it if you contact me. Anyway, enough of that. I was a security guard who worked for an old library that was part of a university over here in the United Kingdom. Due to my schedule with another job, I would only be able to work in the evenings. During work hours at the library, students would walk up to me and share their stories of experiencing strange and bizarre incidents. One of the common themes was the 5th floor. Apparently, students would be studying up there, only to then hear a whisper in their ear. When they would turn around expecting to see a librarian or a fellow student, there would be nothing but cold air. Other students have mentioned feeling someone touching their shoulder or even seen shadows pass by them in the hallways. I never believed any of those statements, but that's until this one day. I'd shown up to work as usual on a Saturday evening and started my routine by preparing myself a coffee with some donuts. Donuts with jelly filling are my favorite. It was approximately 6 in the afternoon and the library would be open for 2 more hours. All I did was just walk around and make sure that everything was in check. It was the weekend after all, so there wasn't much work. Pretty easy money. Fast forward to closing and we're escorting the last few students out of the building. Once that's taken care of, I do my sweeps of each floor just to make sure that nobody was hiding. But before I got the chance to do that, I went back to the break room to grab some water and check the security cameras. When it came to reviewing the cameras on the 5th floor, I noticed that something was out of place. At the very far end of one of the viewable hallways, I was able to just make out a shadow of someone walking. Let me go ahead and give you a visual explanation of what I meant by shadow. You know how when you walk by a light source and a shadow is cast on the opposite side of you? Well, that was pretty much what it looked like, and I knew which light this might have been caused by. So I make my way out of the back office and head toward the elevator. I stood there for about 2 minutes waiting for the doors to open when I remembered maintenance was being done. Thus, I tell myself I could have just been seeing a maintenance man doing his work. I now return back to the office and call maintenance. "Hey there, it's John. I just wanted to ask you, do you have someone working on the elevators at the moment?" "Hey there, John. No, I'm afraid we don't. However, we're sending someone there the next morning to do the repairs." "Why? What's up?" "Oh, it's nothing. Sorry to bother you. I just wanted to ask. Have a great evening." Well, that didn't give me a proper answer. I can now see the 2 remaining librarians sitting at the front desk talking via the security cameras. So then, who was up there? I get up again and make my way up the stairs, slowly but surely reaching the 5th floor. Now let me just make it known, this was during the winter months, and it was at least 30 degrees outside. I'm using Fahrenheit to give you the temperature since I know a lot of you listeners are in the United States. Anyway, this meant that we had the heaters blasting air all day. That didn't explain the cold air I felt, as there were no windows that were open, nor any that were near me. I then made my way over to the little light by the elevator, but I don't find anyone. Then I focus my attention to the camera lens above me. Shining my flashlight, I see no sort of stain or scratch that could have caused the visuals I witnessed with my own eyes. Well, with that, I now begin to make my sweep across the floor. While looking under the desks, I am able to hear the sounds of footsteps nearby. This was followed by something falling over. Startled, I run over to where I'd heard the noise, and there are some textbooks that had fallen to the ground. This was weird, so I put them back on the shelf thinking that in me walking nearby the shelf, they must have fallen over. It's quite a stretch of the imagination, but what else could I have blamed it on? To test my theory, I proceed to jump in place near them, and I shake the shelf too. But the thing is, they won't fall over. Well, this meant that someone actually had to have dropped the books by hand. This is the moment when I finally had enough. So, in a loud and intimidating voice, I say, "I don't know where you're hiding, but we're closed for the evening. You need to leave, right now." Of course, there's nothing but silence and the echo of my voice against the walls. However, moments later, I feel a patch of cold air. This causes all the hairs on my arms to rise up, and I started to feel as if somebody was staring at me. It was obvious I was being paranoid, so I start to make my way back to the staircase. That's when I ended up seeing it. Down the dark hallway, I am able to see a shadow. "There you are. Hey, you need to come with me, we're closed." The shadow then proceeds to turn the corner and I chase after it. But here's the thing to note. The corner in which they decided to turn at only has a water fountain and a wall. Sure, there is a ventilation system hatch, but I would have heard that. Plus, they wouldn't have had enough time to get away from me. Frustrated, I just made my way to the staircase, only for one last thing to happen. I felt somebody push me, and I fall and scrape my knee. How I didn't break my leg? I'm not sure, but I knew one thing. I didn't trip on accident. Let's just say I quit the next morning and I never returned back to that library. As an update, the land this school and library were built on housed an old mental hospital that was founded in the early 1800s, but it was removed in the 1960s to make room for these new buildings. Perhaps that's the reason. Maybe something to do with its past energy. I don't know. What do all of you think? Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and leave a comment telling me what you all thought, and subscribe and turn on notifications if you're brand new. Also, make sure to check out our song, Make a Start. You can find it on Apple Music, Spotify, or even here on YouTube. Go to my YouTube channel and check it out underneath the Creepy Fox topic section. Also, consider grabbing some Creepy Fox merchandise, which you can see right below the video. And if you want early access to brand new videos with no advertisements, as well as exclusive narration videos not available to anyone else, consider becoming a channel member. Which, speaking of, I'd like to go ahead and give them all a shout out. Thank you to Robbie, Bo, Spunky the Nutcase, Rice and Beans, Scott, Sean, Corey, Linz, Maribel, Medu Satil, and our newest member, Silent. Thank you also to the regular viewers who watch the uploads, like, comment, and share them with their family and friends. I appreciate and love every single one of you. Thanks once again for stopping by, and I'll catch you all on the next one. Take care, and have yourself an amazing day.